right, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Dr. B Music Theory here. Glad to have you here. Let me just get set up here and make sure that I can see everything that's happening on the YouTube channel. So give me 1 second. I appreciate your patience here. Okay, we're looking for the live videos and I'm not seeing it quite yet. So I just want to make sure. There we go. There we go. All right. We are live. Excellent. Excellent. And the chat is open. So let me say that again. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. The chat is open. As always, I'm going to start off with a question. And this is a pretty big one. So you can save your questions in the chat. I'm not even going to be looking at that for the next 20 to 30 minutes at least. But after that, I'm going to try to follow up on some of the questions that I didn't get to answer last time we did this, and then take some new questions. So let me tell you what we're going to start with today. So I had a question regarding studying for the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music Grade 8 Theory Examination. So this is happens in the UK. It's a big examination, very standardized test. They have a great website where they list what's involved. And one of the questions for grade 8, and I'm going to read it for you all, says, complete the violin parts in the following extract adapted from a trio sonata by Corelli, following the figuring shown under the basso continuo. So this is what I have up here on the board, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. So let me read that again. Complete the violin parts in the following extract adapted from a trio sonata by Corelli, following the figuring shown under the basso continuo. All right, so this is pretty advanced stuff, grade 8. So for those of you who haven't looked at my YouTube channel, I have lessons 1 going up in order. So it goes in order of difficulty. So if you haven't watched those, you should definitely do that. And probably you're going to want to watch them more than once because it's a lot of information, each one built one on top of the other. So this is assuming that you know what figured bass is, and you know something about non-chord tones, and this is really asking you to compose in a style similar to Corelli, which hopefully you also know who that is. So there's a little bit of music history involved. So let me just kind of reiterate what's going to happen. So I'm going to try to go over and solve this example, and it's going to be a couple different measures. I'm going to solve these measures, then we're going to move on to the next 3 measures, etc. And I'm going to try to give you a step-by-step process on how you would both study for this as well as actually take the exam. Because keep in mind, a step-by-step list on what to do during the exam is going to be useful, but like anything, there's a training session that needs to happen. And so the person, Matthew, who asked this question has a year to study, and this is one of many questions. And so I'm going to go over some of the other questions periodically, but this is one of the questions. So there's a matter of skill development that needs to happen over the course of this next year. So I'm going to give some step-by-step processes on how to actually study and train for this exam, as well as what to do while you're in the exam. And this is going to be beneficial for not only those of you who are taking exams and for either AP Music Theory in the United States or these exams in the UK or a college music theory class, but for those of you who are looking to be better composers and compose music and learn about music, this is all going to have elements that are going to be beneficial to you. Before I go in even further, I'm going to put a link in the description, and this is a live video, so the description I usually edit the following day or 2. I'll put in that. I'm going to put in some links to various things that I reference. I also want to mention to you that there's a new Facebook Dr. B fan page started by one of my loyal subscribers. And what we chatted on the phone, and one of the things that we both talked about is how I get so many great questions, both in these live Q&As as well as on the YouTube channel, in the comments. And I try to answer, and I answer a good number of them. But there's a lot I just don't I'm not able to get to. So what we were thinking is if this fan page could share some information and also have where you can ask each other questions. You can kind of help each other. In a typical college classroom, that's the way it would work. You would have class time, you would meet a bunch of fellow students, you would then go and you would help each other do the homework and get it done, and you'd ask each other questions. So I'm going to put a link to the new Dr. B Facebook page in this description as well, and feel free to ask each other questions. You know, obviously you take that with a grain of salt, right? You're asking a fellow student, they might have the right answer, they might not. So, you know, you need to use your own judgment, just like you would if you were in a classroom setting. But it's going to be helpful. And in the cases where I'm not able to answer your question directly from the comments on YouTube or things you send me, this might get you by in that rough patch as you're trying to learn how to compose something for that next piece you're working on or studying for an exam. So, without further ado, step one, and this is for the training purposes, you should listen to Baroque trio sonatas. And let me spell Baroque so we're all using the same word, right? Baroque trio sonatas. Specifically those by a composer named Arcangelo Corelli, an Italian composer. So Baroque, that means we are talking about the 17th century to around the first half of the 18th century. So roughly 1600 to 1750. This is the time of Johann Sebastian Bach. This is where the overwhelming majority of our music theory is coming from, this time period. Trio sonatas by Corelli, Arcangelo Corelli. So when they say trio sonatas, it's a little misleading because there's usually 4 musicians involved in a trio sonata, which trio you would expect 3. So how is it that this happens? So let me just explain. Usually you'll have like a top melody instrument part, so violin 1 typically, violin 2 typically, and then you have something called the basso continuo. Basso meaning bass, and continuo usually means like a keyboard instrument of some kind. So the basso continuo would usually, not always, but often be played by two musicians. Sometimes a cellist plus a harpsichordist. So the continuo would be the harpsichord playing chords, and then you have a cello reinforcing the bass line that is often also played by the harpsichordist. So it shows the Baroque emphasis on melody plus counter melody in the bass part specifically. So that's what we're talking about. And what we have down here is figured bass. So before you know, if you really want to do well on answering these types of questions, and the question is to fill in the parts. So you'll see that we're in 4/4. We have a pickup of 2 beats. There's 2 beats missing in violin 1, and another 2 beats here, and then there's another 1 beat for this measure and an entire measure missing. And so what the exam is doing is saying, can you fill in what would be an appropriate melody for the violinist to play? That's the crux of the question. They're not asking you to give a Roman numeral analysis or put in lead sheet symbols. We're probably going to do that so that we can answer and fill in and do the composing correctly. But that's not what the question itself is asking. It's asking you to fill in those missing pieces in a way that's harmonically correct as well as stylistically correct. So to understand that style, you should listen. And I'm going to put a link. There's all this great Corelli music, and you can look along at the score. So you can hear what it sounds like, and then you can look and see, oh, this is the way these parts look. And that's going to really make your job a lot easier when you're trying to answer and compose something. And again, we're composing in a specific style. If you're, let's say, a rock guitarist or a pop songwriter, some of these things are going to be applicable because we're still using the major minor tonality system that was really invented back in the Baroque era. We're still using that today. It's still in place. But there's certain stylistic things that will be different. So I'll try to draw attention to those. So after you've done your preparation, and this happens before you walk into the test or the exam, you listen to the music and you look at scores. Now, Once you get into the test, write out lead sheet symbols. I start with lead sheet symbols in part because Roman numerals, which is your other kind of like option, assumes you know what key you're in. And sometimes these examples modulate. So you could kind of waste a lot of time thinking you're in a key writing out Roman numerals when you've really modulated. So I think it is faster and more efficient to start with the lead sheet symbols. And in order to do that, we should review very quickly what exactly figured bass means. What is it that it's telling you? It's specifically telling you the interval above the bass note. So when you see this 6, it means there is an interval a 6 above, diatonically a 6 above, not chromatically, right? So if we look at our key signature, we see right here we have a 6, and it's an A flat. That means there's a note, a 6 above. So A flat, B, C, D, E, F. Whatever F is in our key signature, in this case F natural, is what we would expect. And we can see that right here in the violin too. They wrote that in. So this first measure is already complete for us. So we can use that as a good kind of like make orientation for making sure we're on the right track. So that's what the 6 means. And if there's multiple numbers, like here it says 6, 5, it means there's both the interval of a 6 and a 5th above the bass. So those figure-based numbers will often are shorthand for certain chords. So like 6 usually means first inversion triad, and 6, 5 usually means first inversion 7th chord. But figured bass also refers to voice leading. And what I mean by that is specifically how the voice moves. So sometimes, like in this case where we have the 4, 3, you're indicating a non-chord tone there. It's actually not indicating an actual chord. It's indicating the non-chord tone. In this case, 4, 3 is very common suspension, and that's exactly what we have. We have a C, F is the 4, moving to the 3. Okay, so it's a 4, 3 suspension. So keep in mind that voice leading. Now you'll see all these like horizontal lines. What that usually means is that they want you to sustain the note as things change. So they want you to keep it going, right? So they're like, keep that 6 going. Like in this case, it's 6, and keep it going, right? So you can see that it's a full quarter note. They don't want you to necessarily be adding your own non-chord tones there. There's some exceptions, we'll talk about that. But in general, keep in mind that figured bass refers to specific notes above the bass, which, hint number 2, you might want to pencil in, right? So you might want to pencil in, and I'll do this, right? So you might want to say, okay, that means F here. And here there's a C, so that means F going to an E. In this case, it's going to be E flat. 6, 5 means we have an A here. 6 is going to be the F. 5 is going to be an E, right? And so you can even put in the flats just to remember as courtesy accidentals. So that's what these numbers are saying combined. So you can pencil those in to help you remind it and help you write it, especially when there's these empty spaces that you need to fill in with the melody yourself. So as you're then moving through this, you should label the non-chord tones. It's going to help you. This is it's not required, but you should be aware of it. It's going to help you in terms of writing something in a similar style. So in this case, we can see F, G. So let me back up 1 second. So we have an F. There's nothing underneath it. That implies root position triad. So it implies a root position triad, which would be F minor triad. This G then would be a passing tone. Then we go to A flat in the bass, F here. This would be an F minor triad with A flat in the bass. Then this B flat is a passing tone as well. So we can see here's our lead sheet symbols, F minor triad, F minor in first inversion, A flat in the bass, passing tone, passing tone. Notice they're both on weak beats. This is very common that you have these kind of scale bass lines. We then have a C, F. We know this is going to be our, because C, F, G, that's not a chord, but 4, 3 is typically our suspension. So we know that this is a suspension, which means this is a C minor triad in root position. This B flat here is going to be a passing tone. We then have A natural F, E flat, that would be an F7 chord with A natural in the bass. Okay, and we can see that this A, then it jumps down to the F. That's just changing the inversion, the position, or you can consider it an arpeggiation. When you have an arpeggiation, you don't need to change what you're writing in the lead sheet symbols, or if you were to do a Roman numeral, what happens on the strong beat is usually the indicator of what position. So this is just simply going from the third of that F7 to the root. We don't really need to do anything there. We then see the line stop, and then we have a stop, and the line goes again. So here we have a B flat with nothing underneath it. That means root position triad. In this case, B flat minor because of our key signature, which means this A flat on an upbeat is going to be another passing tone. And you can see there are a lot of passing tones in our bass line. So we know that that's stylistically something we should be looking for. We then move to here, we have a G with a 6 and a 5. So if we keep following my step-by-step process, which is you kind of pencil in the letters, right? 6 above would be our E flat, 5 above would be our D flat. Whenever you have a second, interval of a second, E flat, D flat, that usually means that we're talking about a 7th chord, right? Because 1, 3, 5, 7, 1 and 7 are either a 7th apart or when you invert it, a 2nd apart. So that almost always means that the kind of like the E flat, okay, so if it's a second, it's the upper note, becomes the root, and the D flat becomes the 7th. So this means we're dealing with some kind of E flat chord. So E flat, G, B flat is implied, right? D flat, this is an E flat 7 chord. So let's write in our E flat 7 chord with G in the bass, and it does the same thing. It goes from the G, from the third to the root, just like we did here with the A natural to F. Bum, bum, be, da, ba, dum. So it's like a little bit of a sequence. That's worth noting. That's very common in the Baroque era. And if we're looking at our root movement, this is C, down a 5th to F, down a 5th to B flat, down a 5th to E flat. We're going through the circle of fifths. Super, super common. One of the things that you should do as you're trying to pencil in and put in the lead sheet symbols and get ready for the actual composing is if you want to look for things that are expected, because this is our textbook, right? Corelli, the Baroque era. If you see something that looks really unusual, you should double check. You might be wrong. But here, because I'm seeing a circle of fifths, I can be like, I don't need to double check, because these are timed exams, right? I can just move forward because I said, circle of fifths, that's super common. I probably got it right on the first try. So then if we go here, you see the lines go, and then it stops. We have an A flat with nothing underneath, so it means root position, A flat major triad. This A flat then goes to a C. That's again part of the chord, so it's just changing the position. But we don't need to indicate that because it's happening on an upbeat. We then get a D flat here and an F with nothing underneath it. So this says to me D flat major triad. This looks like a passing tone here, this G. And then we have an A flat and an A flat with nothing underneath it. We're probably dealing with an A flat major triad. So there we go. I've analyzed, I've put in my lead sheet symbols, I've indicated I've indicated where I think there's non-chord tones, so I can just be aware of those. And now I can go move on to let me kind of some of the next steps. So you start at the beginning, right? Because that's a good place to start. And if you were to get stuck at some point, what I then recommend is you jump to the end. And this is the first part of the example. And you figure out the ending, because there's often a cadence at the end, and it's usually 5-1. So you can kind of reorient yourself. You can see if you've modulated. Once you've then gone to the ending, you can then go to the sections in the middle where it looks obvious, where there's a cadence or something that's very clearly what you understand. And what I recommend is you leave the things if you find yourself spending a bunch of time on a section being like, I can't really figure it out, you get stuck, skip it. Go to the ending, go to some cadences in the middle, go to sections you recognize in the middle, figure those out, and then work your way in till you get to the points where you were a little bit stuck. And just ask yourself, well, what would make sense here? And see if you can find that in the music. Because you don't want to do is just simply go from beginning to end and get stuck in like the second measure or the third measure and spend tons of time and then run out of time to finish stuff that's really easy at the end. That's just a kind of like test-taking strategy. Now, for those of you who aren't under the gun for test-taking, we also want to reduce frustration, right? We want you to have fun when you're composing music. So if you kind of are stuck with something and you're getting frustrated, don't let the joy go out of music making. Just jump to something else. Put things into a bigger context. Your brain will kind of keep working on it, and once it sees a bigger picture, you'll often come to the correct answer a lot easier than you would if you just keep hammering at the one spot. All right? So now, at this point, you could start looking at key signatures and Roman numerals, right? So you could say, well, you know, this starts on an F minor, 4 flats, you know, it's either A flat major or F minor, unless this is starting in the middle and it's already modulated, right? So there is those things. Sometimes you'll get excerpts where you've already modulated. So what your key you're in does not match the key signature. But let's see, if we were to kind of call this by Roman numerals and say, okay, let's assume F minor, but you know, that might be a rough assumption, right? Because we have, at this point, if we assume F minor, we do not have a C7, which would be our 5 chord, going to F minor, right? So does that really mean we're in A flat major? Because we do have a 5-7 going to 1 here, right? So sometimes, an example like this, when they're not asking you for the Roman numeral, I just don't even bother. Because what they care about is writing in the right parts and working with the right chords, right? So it's a little unclear with especially just this part. Are we really in F minor, or are we in A flat major? There's not enough real information, because this is not like a cadential, a big cadence. This is an imperfect cadence. It happens over beats 1, 2. It's pretty brief. So I'm not going to even bother to write in the Roman numerals at this point. It's not necessary. So I'm going to skip it, all right? But I'm going to keep my eyes out for anything that looks like modulation. Right now, I don't see anything. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to observe the rhythmic and melodic motives that are being used in this. And so this is primarily, since they're not asking you to write in for this part, they're asking you to complete the violin and what violin 2. What do I notice? I got this part where we have da 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 da. So dotted quarter, eighth down with a repetition. So bum 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 bum. I'm going to try to use that when I'm writing more stuff, right? Because if Corelli used it once, he's probably going to use it again, right? And similarly, we have this F syncopated, because so it's like a quarter tied to a quarter, which is essentially a half note. So we're going to look for doing things like this as well. So those are 2 motives. Then we have this dum dum dum, this scale, right? And so we can see that is also another aspect, just kind of going up the scale, which we know is being used extensively in the bass line. So after I've done that, and I'm going to give you a little preview as we go forward in this example, you will notice that Corelli sometimes writes voice crossing. Okay, voice crossing. Let me talk about this just a little bit. Typically in music theory, voice crossing is one of those rules you are not supposed to break. And what does it mean? It means that violin 1 is higher than violin 2. If at any point that switches and violin 2 is higher than violin 1, that is considered voice crossing. That's normally a bad thing. However, in Corelli trio sonatas, it happens on occasion. And you'll be able to see it as I put up the other measures. So as we're composing, we want to say, listen, that rule that we've studied hard, that's one of those rules that we can find an exception to, and this is one of the places we're going to do it. Otherwise, you'll spend so much time trying to do it without voice crossing, it's going to make your life so much harder. All right, so voice crossing is on the menu. Alrighty, so it's really here on beat 3 in violin 1 that I've got to decide what to do. I need an F7, I definitely need a 6 and a 5. So if we went dun, 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 well, let's just keep going down the scale because I know I need an F, right? So I'm going to put it here, and I'm just going to put it as a half note now because I might color it in to make it a quarter note or whatever. And this E flat continues, right? So we know that it's going to be an F. This E flat, which we know we need, here's some other things we want to keep, right? So we're looking for the necessary notes. We want to make sure that our voice leading is good. And when we're looking at necessary notes, we have to remember what can be omitted, right? Because sometimes there's going to be like a 7th chord. And violin 1 and violin 2 are only 2 notes. And you have a bass line. But sometimes it's a 4-part harmony if it's a 7th chord. So what note should be left out? What notes can be... So typically the things we want to remember, a perfect 5th of a chord can be left out. And sometimes you can leave out the 5th and double or even triple the root. So roots and have a root and a 3rd. So we're going to want to keep that in mind. We want to remember our voice leading. And what does that mean? Things like the 7th of a chord must resolve down by step. Suspensions must resolve down by step. So when we're right here and we have this A natural and this E flat, don't forget this E flat is continuing. Just because you don't see it right here on beat 3, it is continuing. That's the 7th of the chord. It needs to resolve down by step. So I know I'm going to go right there, right? And I know it's a B flat minor triad. I'm going to need that D flat. So I can pencil that in. I know that the 7th is going to resolve down. The other things to keep in mind is kind of like imitation. If you can kind of parts can imitate each other. And then also whenever we have a leap, that you want to step back in the opposite direction. So whenever that happens. So in this case, we have, if I do this, the 6, and it says keep it going, I know the F is going to be common here. I could just put a half note, right? But I'm not going to do that. I noticed that there's this dun, 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 and since I know I need F for both of the F7 and the B flat, I'm going to keep that rhythmic, motivic quality going. I'm just going to keep that going. And here, a D flat, I've just completed the first complete measure, right? I just did it. I knew what notes I needed, and I made a decision. I said, okay, I'm just going to put the D flat here, because I know I need that to complete the chord. The F, I'm going to, instead of writing a half note, I'm going to give it that rhythmical quality. And this is going to show people that I'm understanding and I'm paying attention to what's going on around it. I'm not just putting in the notes as in all half notes or quarter notes. I'm actually considering the melodic and rhythmic qualities of the piece. So if we keep moving, we want an E flat 7. So, well, that means a D flat. Well, I have a D flat right here, right? Smooth voice leading. And notice I could re-articulate it, but look, there's this tie across from beat 4 to beat 1 and that we happened. Let's do the same thing, right? Let's keep what's already been given, keep it going. And we need an E flat. Well, we have an F right here. E flat is a step away, and we can keep our scale up from A flat, G, F. We can go to E, right? And I'm just putting in a white note head just so that I can then modify it as needed. So if I do that, I say, okay, I can just keep those going. Here I got movement in the bass. Very often when I have movement in one voice, I can keep things kind of holding in longer note values in the other voices so that the ear can focus in on the part that's moving. So I'm fine. I don't need to add anything fancy here on beat 1, but right here on beat 2, I've got to get to an A flat major triad. Well, E flat stays, right? That's great, but I know I need a C. Well, this D flat is the 7th of the E flat 7 chord, and I know it needs to resolve down by step because that's the rule. So I can turn it into a quarter note, and look, it's looking so similar to what we already started with. Okay? So I do that, and I know I have a C and the E flat. I know here I'm not going to be continuing down the scale. So I'm going to decide that, you know what, I'm not going to do the dotted quarter eighth note, I'm going to give it a little pause to kind of like show that we're going to do something. We're not do something different. We're not just going to keep going down the scale. So I'm going to keep that E flat as a half note, and I'm going to resolve this down to a C here. Now I'm going to fill this in because I know when I get to here, D flat major triad, there's no C that I can have, right? So I can go D flat, F, A flat. So I could either move this voice to an A flat, because this is a given, right? Whenever you're given something on a test, don't change it. Don't be like, yeah, I decided I don't want to do that. That's not part of the test, right? So leave the given part, and I can either jump down to an A flat, or I could double the root and have a third and just go to D flat. So I could either go jump down here, or I could go up to D flat. So I'm going to put both of those as an option, A flat, D flat. So right here on beat 3, that's what I'm thinking. Now, when I go to the beat 4, A flat, right there we've doubled the root. So that means I know I'm going to want to have a C. So my question is either to go C, A flat, C, or C, D flat, C. I like smooth voice leading. So I'm going to always recommend that. I'm going to go to the D flat, into the C here. And there we go. I've now completed those first 2 measures. Now, let me play it for you super, super slow, in part because I'm not the greatest pianist. I'll play this fast on saxophone, but not on piano. But also, when we do it really, really slow, you can really hear how the different things go. And I like to re-articulate suspensions, because on a piano, the sustain dies, unlike the violin. So we have, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And then we go to, so that wasn't the greatest, but it gives you a little sense. Let me do that again for you, right? So we have, and it sounds pretty, right? And if you've listened to a lot of Corelli trio sonatas, you're like, that sounds right. Doesn't, you know? Now in an exam setting, you don't have the luxury of being able to play it on the keyboard, but it is worth trying to sing it to yourself. So you can just be like, I'm gonna, da 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 da, you know, and just try to sing through the different parts to see if that sounds right. At least gives you a ballpark. That's if you have time. If you don't have time, that's not a critical step. But certainly if you're at home, you can then check yourself by playing it on the piano or by putting it into NoteFlight or any of the music notation software programs out there and then just having it play back. So that's highly recommended. So just as you would listen to Corelli to start, when you're done, put what you composed into some music notation software and listen to what you wrote and see if it sounds stylistically similar. So this is how I would handle those first couple measures. Let me put up some additional measures, okay, onto the board, and we can keep going in this example because that gets us started and kind of gives us the step-by-step process that we're going to use. But you know, it can get pretty complicated, and I spent a good bit of time kind of like working and reworking this example before I felt prepared to present it to you all here today. And one of the things I tried to do, and maybe one of you all can find it, is I wanted to check my work when I got done, right? I wanted to see what Corelli actually wrote. So I was trying to look up online and see, could I find what trio sonata, it's marked vivace. So, but it doesn't say like which trio sonata, you know, so it's, I was trying to look at, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it online. I found some that were similar, that had like a dun dun dun, but then the basso continuo part. So I wasn't sure if it was just later in the example. I just ran out of time. But if any of you find which trio sonata this example was, please list it in the comments. That would be super interesting, because once you've done your part of like composing it, wouldn't it be neat to be like, see how close you got to what, you know, the masters did, which is kind of would be a great little exercise in and of itself. So here, and I'm going to start with the bass. This is going to be our next 3 measures. So let me pace it out so I can. So I'm going to go 3 measures. So I'm going to say 1 measure. Divide this into 2 parts. So we're going to try to keep it nice and neat. So we got here, it goes to an E flat and then an E natural. When I see this, I always think of like a secondary 7th chord going up. So it might be that, or it might be a first inversion, secondary 5 chord. But either way, that's what I'm guessing. And so here, numbers, they have a 4. They then keep that, whatever that voice is, then they have 3. Oh no, I'm sorry, I miswrote that. So they have the 4, a little dash, then a 3 on beat 2, and then a longer dash, and then a 9, followed to a 6, and then it goes to C with a 4, and a dash, then C down the octave, which always sounds to me like 5, always like a 5 chord when you have those octave jumps, with a natural sign. I should write stem direction appropriately. So right there, C, C, F, that looks like a big 5-1 cadence in the key of F minor, which was something we were looking for earlier on. And then we have this go to a 6, meaning some change of chord there. And I'll get out of the way. I know where I'm standing. Sometimes it's a little hard to see, but don't worry. I'll get out of the way shortly. And you'll then be able to, and I will double check then and make sure I put in everything correctly. So we got the 6 here. And this keeps, we got a 4. Natural. Okay, so there you go. Let's take a look at our basso continuo. 4 with a dash to the 3, 9 dash over to the 6, sustaining it, 4 with the dash going to the natural sign. That's held over to the F, and they put a line here like that. Then they put another line after the 6. Again, that's showing that the voices should be sustained when possible. Not always possible, but when possible. 5, 6 with a dash to a 4, small dash, natural sign dash. Okay, great. And then what was given is we had an A flat with a 8th note, and it's tied over from the previous measure. If you can always go back and look and see what that was. Then you have a B flat dotted quarter note, C, B flat 2/16. That's a new rhythmic motivic figure. We haven't seen that before. And then a dotted quarter there. And then we're missing that, what to do there. And then they give us in the violin 2 the G, C. We got this little syncopation thing here. So this is a new bit of a melodic motive. And this goes up to the D flat. And then they don't give us anything. And they give us right here E natural, quarter note on beat 4. And for the violin 1, they don't give us anything until beat 3 here, F, jumping an octave. So remember what I said, when we have a leap, we often want to step back in the opposite direction, right? So these are the things And they don't give us anything, and then they give us the G here with a tie. All right, so let me make sure I have that correct. I think I do. All right, and as I'm looking, you can start solving. Look at what that basso continuo is. See what you would start putting in. All right, so let's get started together. If you remember the checklist, right, and let me say it again. You're going to look at the figured bass. You're going to pencil in the letters so that you know what letters you're looking for. You're going to label non-chord tones, and you're going to observe kind of new motives. So we have this dum, dee dee dum. So it's kind of like the dotted quarter eighth. Now the eighth turns into 2/16. So maybe we can do something with that. This bump, 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 and then we have ba ba da. So eighth, quarter note on the upbeat eighth note. That's something new there. So we're going to see maybe we can do something with that. All right, we have an E flat 4/3 means A flat going to G. And actually the G would be right over, I should line it up right over here on the E natural. So A flat to G. Well, we got the A flat here, but it's only indicated as a eighth note. So we're going to probably have some kind of embellishment there. Then I have this 9. When I see a 9, it's almost always a suspension, right? So I'm going to expect that it's probably going to be so I have F, I have A flat. We're probably talking an F minor triad, root position, but I know I'm going to have this G continuing. So I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to actually start using a different color here because my blue marker is fading out. So let me just put in black so I can make sure everyone sees it. A flat, we want a G. We're going to have a G continue. When we have this A flat here, we're going to want to have an F because that's the 6 above the A flat here. We have a C with a 4, which means we have an F. C with a natural means E natural. F, a 6 above the F means a D, in this case D flat, which is right there. So some of these are already given, right? We have an A flat with a 5, so it means we need an E flat. We have a 6 above again, it's still an A flat, so that means it goes F. Here we have a C with a 4, it means F, going to a natural sign, E natural. When it's just a natural sign, it applies to the 3rd above the bass. So there we go, I pencil in all those. Then it's time for me to put in my lead sheet symbols. We have an E flat, B flat, 4/3. This is going to, the 4/3 often means that we're talking about a 4/3 suspension. So E flat major triad is what I'm looking at. Going to E, keep the B flat, and then we have the C here. So what that would apply to me with the C, so you could say E diminished, right? That's one possibility. But E diminished root position is a little unusual. So I actually think this is more accurately referring to a C7 with E natural in the bass. So that would be very common. Going to F, A flat, looks like an F minor triad. The 9 is a suspension. Then we have A flat, F, so it's just F minor in first inversion. So we got the A flat there. So here, this FF, same note chord, this becomes a passing tone, like we've had before. Here we have a C, a G, and we have a 4, which means F. That sounds like 4/3 suspension, so I'm going to call that a C. And we're going to E natural, so it's a C major triad. C down here, so there we go, we have it. Then it goes to F with an A flat, F, that's F minor triad for sure. Then we have a 6 go in there, so that would be F with a D flat. So that would be a D flat major triad with F in the bass. And I'm doing this pretty quickly, I do recognize that. So this is why it doesn't hurt to pause, go through some of those early so you can start doing things quickly. So I'll slow it down just in this one spot. I have an F. I know that I need a D flat. In the music I got D flat, I have F. So F, D flat, implicit with a 6 is also a 3. The 3 would be A flat, so D flat, F, A flat. There's my triad, D flat over F. Then here we have an A flat, and I know I need to have an E flat. 5 implicit is 3, so this is probably an A flat major triad, right? And then here we get with a 6, so that would be, we have A flat, F, 6-3 means an F minor triad with A flat in the bass. Then we have C, 4 going to the natural, just like we had 4 going to natural, so it's the same exact thing harmonically. It's a C major triad. So let's take a look. So we've now done our lead sheet symbol. Next, we're going to try to put in our voices, and we're going to try to complete it. And this time I'm going to complete it in red, just so that it stands out. And my blue is dying. All right. So E. I'm looking for a C7. So here I have this A flat, and they give me like a beam. So I know I'm going to want to. I know that this A flat has to go down to G eventually, right? And I know I really want it on beat 2. So I know I'm going to be there. So, but what can I do, right? Da da da, da da da. So I'm going to try to do the same thing. I see this here. I'm going to try to do the same thing, right? And I'm going to just go ba da da. So I'm going to get that gesture of 8th to 16th that I saw here, the 2/16. So I'm just going to ba da da. So it's almost like a premature resolution of the 4. But then I do a lower neighbor. So it's almost like anticipation, lower neighbor, resolution. And then I've got my E, B flat, G, which looks like E diminished triad, but then the C could kind of make it sound a little bit like a C7. So that kind of works. But then we see that we got this 9 continuing. Well, I remember from my earlier example that it's common that we tie things over. So I'm actually gonna tie this over, and actually that's actually not correct. And this, what stylistically they did in this is they would put notes across the imaginary bar line. They would write a half note. Sometimes that happened. So I'm going to turn it and do the same thing. I'm going to have it as a half note. So that's my 9. And then it goes to a 6. So you notice A flat, G, G, F, F, E natural. This is like a scale. So this scale is happening in the violin 1. And I'm going to go to the F right here. And then this F stays over. So I can put the tie. Oh, it's looking like that other stuff, right? It looks like what was in the violin 2 before. And you'll notice right here, I told you the voice crossing was proven. A flat here in violin 1, B flat was higher, going to a C. So we have voice crossing here. It's like the two parts have exchanged what they were doing. The violin 2 now becomes the melody, and then the violin 1 starts taking on those characteristics and same melodic and rhythmic qualities that we had in violin 2 at the beginning. So we again have F. We know we got to go to an E natural, right? So we'll do that. And there we go. Look at how we just completed the violin 1 part in a way that makes sense with our basso continuo figured bass and has cohesiveness to what the violin 2 part used to be. Now here we have an A flat and they're just missing an 8th note, but there's nothing to indicate that we want to change pitches. So here we do the violin 1 thing, which had the da, 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 right? We put in a little 8th note to recognize that what the violin part had. Then we have bum, 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 and then it has an imitation there. We get to here, we know we need an E flat. We just did F to F leap. We want to step back in the opposite direction. What note is that? That note is an E flat. Jackpot, which is exactly what we need. And we also need a C to complete our A flat major triad. Look at, there's a D flat right here. Oh, it's so perfect. It's so perfect. We can have our C right here. Smooth voice leading. I love it. Now we want an F. Now, here's a tricky spot, right? And this is one of the spots I reworked. Do we put the F right back, kind of like, so we have the, or do we have from here, or do we have it go into here? Notice that where we're going, we got this F. We definitely know we have to have an F here. That's critical. We have to have an F here in the violin too, because this F has to go to the E natural. 4, see that little dash? That means in that voice. So I know I needed an F. I'm like, let's do another F. F, F, right there, half note. Just that same kind of quality we had here and here. Do it there. Now, in the sense now, we've got the F, we've got the A flat. Do we want to put a C here to get a C, or do we want to do something where we're doing another doubling? And so we'll look at where we're going, right? So whenever you're asking these types of questions, look where you need to get. I need to get to a G, right? So I could just move up and have them both playing F, but that's not very good. We want harmony between the two. If I'm dealing with an F minor triad and I need to get to a G, you know what's pretty close is an A flat, right? And I could have 2 A flats and an F. That's fine. It's a first inversion triad when we get to here. So I would like to keep this same pattern going. I'm going to try to be creative, right? And I'm going to erase this so I can have a little bit of room. And then I'm going to do an anticipation for the G. Right there. Right? And this is, let me put it here, F minor over A flat. All right? So I'm sorry, that's not a dotted quarter. So what I've done now is I've taken this motive that started in the violin 2, and I then moves to the violin 1, and then I keep it going. And this way, when the violin 1 takes over again as the highest voice, so we had voice crossing right here, right through here, then we go back, right? I don't want to change and then do voice crossing again quite so quickly again, right? That's if you do voice crossing back and forth too frequently, it does get confusing. It makes it sound kind of like more floaty, like if you're kind of do medieval Periton Leonin, lots of voice crossing works. It kind of makes it feel like this undulating mass of voices that crisscross. That's not what Baroque is about. They have voice crossing where it's really almost like an exchange. It's like violin 2 becomes violin 1 as the role. So it's not an idea so it's actually really an exchange. So we have an exchange, and then we go back, and we don't want to go back and forth too quickly, too frequently, without kind of any kind of structure to it. So that's why I decided to expand it and keep going up higher. Alrighty? So, I think, I could keep going with this example, and what I might do is I'm gonna show you kind of what I did. I'm gonna hold it up to the camera, right? So here's the last 3 lines in terms of what's there. Let me make sure you can see it okay. Sorry for. Let me move it out a little bit there. That's not helping you at all, is it? Okay, so I'm still not doing a very good job here at making it clear to you, but there you go, right? So there we can see a little bit more of the example of how it goes and what we do. And I might attach a photo or try to do something, put something up there. But that really gives you a good sense. And I'm gonna play for you. It's probably not gonna be loud enough. But I use Finale as my music notation software of choice. But let me try to get close and turn it up for you.
My music notation software.
Oh, sorry. Actually, that's not going to work because we're going to hear. Well, maybe if I wait a second. Okay, so give me a couple seconds.
Okay, so give me a couple seconds.
All right. So that doesn't work greatest because I'm streaming it, so you can kind of, mic picks it up. But the takeaway is, I got done, I put it into music notation software, I listen back, and I try to make sure that it makes sense to my ears, and I make any adjustments that are necessary. All right? Woo! That was good. We got a lot covered, some important stuff. So, couple questions and comments I got from previous Q&As. I had a question a couple of weeks ago about, did I know about any atonal development sections in an otherwise tonal sonata? And the person asking a question actually answered it in part for themselves. They pointed out Alfred Schnittke's Concerto Grosso No. 1 as being a good example of that. And I listened to it and I was like, oh yeah, he totally has sections that are obviously tonal and then sections that are largely not tonal, which is kind of what I guess, but you know, that's as the typical way that would happen. But this was a particularly good example. So I just wanted to, for those of you who are interested in that question, this was from David. I just wanted to draw your attention to this example for those of you who were curious. Another one of the questions I got was, can one create artificial harmonies on a piano like one can do on a string instrument? So for string instruments, whether that's a guitar or violin, you can lightly touch the string at certain spots and you get these artificial harmonics. And they have this really cool timbre. They sound like really pure and they ring. They're like crystal clear. So there's a lot of examples also in popular music. So like the Baroque band Yes, the song Roundabout has that introduction where you have that on the guitar. And there's a lot of classical composers that use the harmonics and what were kind of like also called artificial tones. So piano, there were composers in the 20th century who did, and you can do this on the piano because the piano is a string that vibrates. So you can kind of go inside the piano and start, you can strum the strings, you can put your finger down on a certain spot and then pluck it, which is basically how you create the artificial tones on any kind of string instrument. So the answer to the question is yes, you can, and certain composers have done that, including people like I'm trying to get some names for those who are interested. In the classical area, you have people like Henry Cowell, I think would be a good example. Now, some of it is going to be kind of like non-pitch oriented, meaning more sound effects than what we traditionally call music. But some of it, will be sound effects interspersed and partnered into the music. But Henry Cowell would be a good example of that. And then my final question before I turn to my new chat here is, what do you think about using artificial intelligence to produce music? Do you think they will define a new paradigm of music? So artificial intelligence and music. I really know very little about this. Obviously, how you program the artificial intelligence or how you set it up to learn, kind of the learning algorithms are going to be critical in terms of what output you get, right? The garbage in, garbage out adage will hold true even when you're trying to set up artificial intelligence where there's certain learning protocols. So the obvious way to do it is, if you were to feed in all the great music of the past into an AI system and say, hey, we want you to extrapolate and create something that's a variant of that using these principles. Would that create a new paradigm? My initial instinct is to be kind of like an old cranky person and say no, because if you're looking for, what are the, new permutations of the same old thing, yeah, that might be nice, but are you going to get a new paradigm? Are you going to, like, if you feed in, like, let's just kind of like historically, let's say you fed into an AI system. And I guess you could test this, right? And this would be the way to do it. Feed into an AI system all of your ancient Greek music, all of your medieval music from Leonin and Periton and Marchot, and let's see if we get Bach, right? Because that's what it would be. If we're going to get a new paradigm, you would have to feed in something to a certain point in history and then see if you get the next step. Or if you wanted to say, let's put in Bach, Vivaldi, George Friedrich Handel, if we put all that into an AI system, do we get Mozart? I don't think so. But the advances being made in technology are going to go beyond my imagination. There's certainly no one in the Middle Ages who thought that there would be a YouTube live video or anything remotely like this. It just was unimaginable. So there might be some AI things with music that I just can't imagine at this juncture. But I think the first thing to do to test it would just to be like put in history up to a certain point and see whether you get something that actually happened historically down the road in terms of evolution. Because music history is really an evolution of musical knowledge. It's like human beings didn't just like spring up and be like, I know how to write a symphony. I know how harmony works. It was observation over hundreds and hundreds of years, observation on how sound works, how it affects the emotions, that human beings learned how to write a symphony and how to write a sonata and how to write a song. These things these are not innately, this is not innate, inborn, instinctual knowledge. This was learned and passed down from generation to generation. So that's how I would test whether AI could do that. And if you can develop an AI system where you put in everyone up through Bach and you get yourself Mozart and Beethoven, you did a good job. You will have convinced me. All right, I'm going to turn to the chat. All righty. All right, we got people from India. Okay, we got our first question here. Can you explain the devices used in madrigals to express emotions like sospiro, whisper, or other emotions? That's a great question. So let me clear off the board. Thank you for that one. So we're dealing with madrigals, and for those of you who just to give a little context, we're talking music history here. We're talking Italy. We're talking the late Renaissance. So we're talking before the Baroque era. That's not true. Madrigals continued, but there's actually a medieval madrigal, but that's not super musically as interesting as the 16th century Italian madrigal. This is the one that's like the first really, really juicy, interesting madrigal. So it was a through composed song. And what that means is it didn't have any obvious repetition. It wasn't like verse, chorus, refrain, verse, chorus, refrain. It was through composed. So it was kind of like section, 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 section. Just evolved and unfolded. And one of the things they used extensively was something called word painting. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that this was essentially a polyphonic style, so multiple melodies, and not as much concern given to harmony, moving to harmony, moving to harmony. That's more of what's invented in the Baroque era. So we're dealing primarily with a polyphonic model and word painting. So how did they do it? So what would happen is that they would have the music would imitate the words. So in the question, whisper, obviously you mark that piano. You make it soft. And perhaps instead of having, let's say there's 5 different voices, right? Instead of having 5 voices sing whisper, you have one person sing at piano the word whisper. That would be an example of word painting. So there's other examples, and I've talked about Luca Marenzio, his piece on some of my earlier videos, where it's the first word of the text is alone. So guess of all the voices, how many people start off the song? Correct, 1, right? Alone. and there's some great pieces by so Luca Marenzio, and I'll write his name because it's just worth checking this music out if you haven't. William Byrd is an English composer from the Renaissance. He has a piece called "Sing Joyfully Unto God." And it has some of these English madrigalists. So it starts off in Italy, but the English loved their Italian music, so they adopt it. So you have William Byrd and like Thomas Wilkes. And I forget exactly which composer, but there's this one passage I remember from one of the English madrigals where they call running down the main or something, running down. So and it says ba ba da 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 dum, and like each one is like follows each other. Da 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 dum, bum ba da 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 dum, bum ba da 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 dum, bum ba da 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 dum. So you have this idea of running down, and it's bum ba da 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 dum, bum bum running down the scale. Then another voice goes da running down the scale, dum running down the scale. But it's not, the words aren't running down the scale. It's running down something else. So that kind of word painting is what composers would use. And you know, there's a lot of the stuff that's like really on the nose, meaning it's like really obvious. Alone, or sing, everyone sing together, like everyone. If you use the word everyone, you know. But you'd have this minute stuff like where they use the word darkness, you know, and so you'd use harmonies that are dark harmonies, like minor. You'd shift to minor. Another composer who was really good at this was Carlo Gesualdo, who has one of the most interesting openings harmonically. It goes something like. Now he was not thinking of it in terms of chords, but it was like D flat major to A minor with C in the bass, B major. So let me just. So you have this. It's like. I think it's G major after that, but this is like Moro, Lasso. So this is another Italian madrigal. And if you want to have anything that's like dark and brooding, and Carlo Gesualdo's your guy. I mean, he used this kind of word painting to really capture the text. So I think that's kind of like some of the devices. Harmonic, orchestrational. Like, so there's the harmony you can use. You can use dynamics. How many different singers are involved. The range. So high and low. So think of all the different musical elements and how you can then associate them with the text. And the whole spirit was how we can make text and music come together in a way that really reinforces each other. Because you have two different art forms. You have kind of literature, poetry. You have music, and they can exist independently. And the idea is, how do we put these two different art forms together in a way that they really, really reinforce each other? And the Italian madrigalists and how it transplanted over to England, they gave us a really great example on many of the devices that can be used. All right. Live, what a treat. Okay, greetings from Ireland. Awesome. Messing with Sibelius. Yeah, Sibelius is good. 2 years ago, today in Zagreb. Oh, hey, Andrew. That's amazing. That was a really fun. I really appreciate it. Full like tour of Zagreb, which is capital of Croatia, over in Europe. It was a great trip. I did not know it was today. That's so cool. Thanks for letting me know. I would like suggestions of books or websites to know form in depth, both contemporary music and more old music. Ooh, I will have to work on that one, Elton. You know, it's Google is good. Google search is great, but there's so much information up there. It's almost like you need someone to curate that information so that you don't spend all your time trying to figure out what's the reliable source that's easy to understand for the level and that's clear, concise, and accurate. So I'm going to see if I can find out a little bit more. I don't have a bunch of names off of the top. Oh yeah, hey, ABC, that's awesome. Thanks for answering that. Classical Form by Kaplan is a good start. I'll check that out as well, and if I agree with you, I'm gonna put that in the description. Oh, hey Kayla. All right, some people. I would fail this, but I could probably do it messing around with Sibelius if I could hear the notes. Yeah, that's a great comment. So the example we did is like, if you could mess around with it in Sibelius, would you be able to come up with something that's accurate? Yeah, that's different than sitting in a classroom where you're not even allowed to like necessarily play a piano or sing it out loud and actually come up with the thing. Because usually when you get tested on this kind of stuff, you're not allowed to just like start singing because there's other people working on their exam. So whether you can imagine it in your mind clearly enough, right? And I make this analogy to the human senses with vision, right? So I'm going to take off my glasses here. All right, you all look like a Monet painting now, right? The clarity is gone a little bit. And so, you know, if my vision's really good, I can make out every detail. I can tell you exactly like colored, what shapes I'm seeing, what things are. With listening, a lot of us hear as if we are listening like a Monet. We kind of get the sense of it, but it's a little bit blurry. We got the emotion, we got all that, but the fine details, our sense of hearing is not so good, like my current vision, to be able to get all the details. And what we do want is we want our ears to be more like Vermeer or some of the, or Sir Lawrence Elma Tadema, where you have this crystal clear and you're like, oh, that's exactly what it sounds. So that if you were to have to complete the test we were doing, the test question we did at the beginning of this video, that you could actually like sing it through and actually hear most of it in your imagination. That's what oral skills and ear training classes are for. And that's what Mozart could do, and Dmitri Shostakovich and the great composers. And, you know, Beethoven, he went deaf and he still wrote music. It's because his musical imagination was so crystal clear, he could hear the music in his imagination, and it would be as accurate as if he heard it in the physical world. So yeah, that's a good case to say keep working on your ear. Always keep working on your ear. Got a question here. Which book did I use to learn music history and orchestration? And will you ever create a series of the same like your music theory series? Well, I'm really, it's a matter of time. I've been thinking real hard about a music history one, in part because this fall semester, I'm going to be teaching music history online. It's already been, my college has determined we're not going back in person. So I'm doing everything online. And so making some music history videos for this fall, end of August we start the end of August, is something that would make a lot of sense. So if I can figure out and carve out the time to do that, I will be doing one. And so there's a high likelihood that it's going to happen. Some of them will happen before the end of August, and then throughout the semester up through December, which would get us all the way through the end of the Baroque era. And then in the spring semester is when we start with people like Mozart and Haydn. So certainly there's a chance that that might start sometime this summer and continue for this next academic year. I've always loved the idea. It's like the amount of time and energy is really substantial to do something where you put yourself out there and be like, this is it. It's frozen in time. You gotta stand by what you put. It's gonna be there. Even these music theory videos, when we go back to the earlier ones, you'll look in the description and you'll see that very often, not often, but every now and then there's a video that says mistake in a timing, like 3 minutes and 45 seconds or 40 minutes and 30, when you're doing something live, which is the way I recorded them, the chances of you of saying everything perfectly 100% of the times is just so, it's a great challenge, but that's a really tough standard to meet. So every now and then there's a mistake. But I work really hard to try to make sure that I'm giving as accurate information out to you all as possible. So that's why I've been a little bit, I'm not just whipping off music history videos without thinking about it. But let me pull some books off of my bookshelf to show you what I used. So when I was 18, 19, I used this book for orchestration. It was by Samuel Adler, A Study of Orchestration. And I thought this was a good book. I haven't really used it, read it, but I've used it as reference since then. So for example, it's great. It's got like category plucked string instruments, and then it'll talk to you about the harp and the range of the harp and how the pedals are arranged and little examples of how things work. And then they'll typically have like a nice index where you can look up things you need. Then usually there's great, names of instruments in 4 languages and their English abbreviation, instruments and their ranges. You got all this kind of like written range, sounding range, comments, things like that. So I found this to be really good, and given how old this is, there's got to be like used editions available for very, very cheap. So I would recommend Samuel Adler, The Study of Orchestration. Then for music history, and I think I've mentioned this before, I forget the name of the book I originally used, but when I first taught music history, I went to this HarperCollins College Outline, History of Western Music. And I found it to be really, like, it doesn't got the fancy pictures, and it doesn't have, all the other stuff, but it's like concise, bare bones, essentialized, just what you need. When you're studying music history, it's like there's so much information, right? It's very easy to get overwhelmed. At a certain point, you're like, it's like, and on January 3rd, 1748, Bach had eggs for breakfast. And you're like, it's just too much. Like, why is this important? What is this? Why do I need to, like, you can get too much. And a lot of history books, kind of fall into that trap. So I love the HarperCollins History of Western Music College Outline. The big thing I've found with history of music books, is sometimes they like to put them into these categories. So they'll be like opera, and so they'll cover opera for like 100 years, and then they'll be like instrumental music, and they'll boom, or vocal music. And I think doing it by like a genre or category is interesting, and you can get certain insights, but I would not start my initial understanding and learning of music history in that fashion, and a lot of books are doing that. I think the way you should start learning the history of music is as the evolution of musical knowledge, as the innovations, the musical innovations that composers discovered. So I think you want to learn about, I think Schubert and his innovations in kind of like German lied and song cycles, you want to understand where that comes in a kind of chronological timeline, because sometimes certain things influence other genres. In other words, like opera often influences orchestral music, and sometimes orchestral music influences operas, and sometimes songs influence. So if you just do one genre straight through for a long period of time, you miss the influences that are coming from other kinds of music that play a part. And I think it's the innovation and the history of that innovation is the most essential base for your understanding of music history. After you have that, then you can do a study on just, let's say, opera. And I remember when I was working on my doctorate, I took one of those hyper focus where it was the operas of Benjamin Britten. So like one composer, just his operas. I took an entire course just on that. It was great. I loved it. But if I had started, if all my music history had started with that, it would be just a bunch of fragmented knowledge, and I wouldn't see the overarching history and how that unfolds. The other factor that I recommend you look for when you're looking for a good history of music book is that you're also talking about, the book tries to answer the question why. Well, why did this develop now? Why did this music sound this way at this point in history? And the only way you can really find out the why is to understand the culture from which it comes. What are the people from that culture? What was in the air? What was in the water? What were they thinking about? What did they think was important? So when you're saying, well, why did Mozart's music sound like that? You have to realize he comes from the Age of Enlightenment, and that there were certain ideas about, clarity and things, everything making sense. And these ideas absolutely influence the way the music sounds. And composers are looking for innovative sounds that fulfill these ideas and these sensibilities of that time. And that's a little bit hard to find books that do a good job. So a lot of books will give you the historical perspective from an economic, political, as well as comparing to the other arts. And I think that's valuable. If I think of some other options, I'll put those in the description. But HarperCollins College Outline is where I'd start. All right. Yeah, why? ABC's saying, I've struggled to understand why figured bass is useful. Couple reasons. One is, you can see the kind of voice leading that we talked about, where it's like, oh, could you imagine? It wouldn't sound as good if I had like the suspension, like if I'm having a 4/3 suspension. If it goes 4, let's say I have a 5/4/3, and so instead of doing this, let's say I did this. This sounds great. Instead, I do this. That wouldn't sound as good. And some of what the figured bass is doing is it's telling you to keep the 5 where it is and have the 4 go to 3. So it's not. So keep in mind. I feel like I'm going to talk about like the old Twilight Zone. I control the horizontal, the vertical. There's a vertical aspect to music, meaning chords, and a horizontal, which is melody and voice leading. And really, you want the best of both worlds. So early on in kind of like music history, medieval polyphony, Renaissance polyphony, there was an absolute emphasis on the horizontal, and not a ton of attention to the vertical. And so what happens with figured bass is it's trying to put those two things together. It's trying to say, listen, we're going to pay attention to this melody and voice leading so that we do this. 5 stays at 5, 4 goes to 3. But at the same time, we're still getting these vertical chords. And that's why figured bass is like, it's a little unusual and it's hard to wrap your head around. The other reason why it was important was for printing purposes, save space. Writing out the basso continuo line with figured bass took a lot less ink, and technologically it was a lot easier and a lot faster and cheaper to produce sheet music. So it was a shorthand. It was a way to why write out everything if you have abbreviations? So that's from a historical perspective, figured bass was important in that way as well, because the printing of sheet music and the dissemination of sheet music was a huge thing and helps in terms of people being able to study. Think about, so I'm going to just make this analogy. I haven't really thought about it before, but when sheet music started to become affordable back in, I guess somewhat affordable in the late Renaissance, early Baroque, what that meant is people all over the world could study the music of Vivaldi. Before, you would have to go study with Vivaldi in person. It was cost prohibitive, it was too expensive. Geographically, people, you couldn't necessarily relocate your family. So having mass-produced sheet music revolutionized people being able to understand, learn, and study music. Here's my analogy. Now you have things like YouTube, and it is revolutionizing how people are learning new information. Not all of you can come and study with me at my college and take my music theory class. However, look at this free resource that's available as long as you have an internet connection. you can get all this knowledge. So it's again, it's a huge information revolution. And there's a reason Gutenberg and the printing press, and then the sheet music publishers like Petrucci in Italy and Pierre Atteignant in France. That's why these guys deserved to be in history books, because they were kind of like the Dr. B music theory of their time. I should probably not compare myself to that. But anyways, the idea of sharing information, I think, is a valid one. All right. Let me just keep looking here at some questions. All right. Oh, yeah. Key asked about, so I answered the question about artificial intelligence and music composition. So I answered that one. I think it's an interesting one. I'd love to talk to people doing experiments in that. I got another question. When you're listening to a song, how do you distinguish between, say, 4/4 and 8/4 or 3/4 and 6/8? Sometimes mix them up. Okay, that's a good question. And, I love that people are asking questions about rhythm, because very often, I've said this before, it's so easy to get caught up in the pitches and the harmonies and the chords that we forget about rhythm. And, if you think about, of course it makes sense that like jazz comes about from combining European harmony with African rhythmic sensibilities, right? Because the rhythm is the area that is often neglected, or not, I wouldn't say neglected, but is not investigated with the same kind of energy. So 4/4 versus 8/4, 3/4 versus 6/8. All right, so what we want to keep in mind here is that it all has to do with accents and subdivision. So we have to deal with finding the accents, listening for the subdivision of the beat. So accents will become our beat, but not always, right? So actually, so it's more complicated than that. So accents will help tell us where our downbeat is, where our actual beat is, as well as subdivisions of the bar. So I'm sorry, that's a little bit small. And subdivision of the beat is the other aspect. So let's take a look at 4/4, right? So 4/4 means that accent 1 is the loudest. It's the loudest accent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, right? So then we have 2, we have 3, and we have 4. So 2 is a bit softer, so is 4. 3 gets like 2, so if we're doing 3 volume markers, 1, 2, 1. So the loudest accent is on 1, the second loudest is on 3, and then beats 2 and 4 are softer yet. So we get accents indicating the downbeat, the subdivision, which is into 2, meaning that we're subdividing the bar into 2 equal parts, beats 1 and 2, beats 3 and 4, which is why people talk about this thing called the imaginary bar line that happens between beats 2 and 3. So we have our downbeat, our subdivision of the bar, and then our actual beat. So that's how we figure that out. After that, within every beat, subdivision is into 2 or 3 parts. And this is called either simple meter or compound. Those are the words they used. So if there's 2 divisions of the beat, it's called simple meter. If it's 3, it's called compound. So if you're having music and you're having something like, so let me give you a couple examples. If I go like this, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to clap a beat, and I want you to tell me what meter it is. Is it in Is it 2 beats per measure, 3 beats per measure, 4 beats per measure, 5 beats per measure? Which one? I tried to clap them all exactly the same so you couldn't tell. I try not to put any accents. So if I do this, hopefully you can say, oh, that's triple meter. There's 3 beats, 3 beats. Now, if I'm going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, da 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 dun dun. So ba da da bum ba da 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 bum 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 ba da 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 bum 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 ba da 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 bum ba da 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 bum. Let's sing something from Bach. Is the subdivision of the beat into 2 or 3 parts? Bum 1 2 1 2 bum 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 1 2 1 2 dum. It's into 2 parts. So that's simple meter. So what I just sang was 3/4. Got 3 beats per measure because you can hear the accent, soft, soft, loud, soft, soft, and then simple because it's the beat is being divided. How do you know what the beat is? It's easy to confuse. Beat is usually something that's in the area of what you could walk, slow jog, right? So da 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 ba da. So if you said da 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 da, that's too fast to be a beat. I mean, that would be a good run. It would be a good run. Usually beats are more towards a walking speed. So one of the challenges for distinguishing between, let's say, 4/4, 8/4, 3/4, 6/8, make sure you're going fast enough. By the same token, dum ba da 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 bum 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 bum. That's a really slow beat, right? So I'm just clapping 1. Bum ba da 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 bum. Walking speed is usually where your beats are. Because you could either do it too slow or you could do it too fast in terms of determining what's the beat. Now, 4/4 versus 8/4. So 8/4 this is like so unusual. Super, super, super unusual. So in general, you're going to be like, it's 4/4. The only time, the way you would have to make it 8/4 is that 1 would have to be definitely more accented. Now, a way you can do accents in addition to a dynamic, right? Because an accent can be volume, can be dynamically by volume. Also by chord change. So you could say, you know, you have so if I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right? And so if I were to change every 8 beats, the chords, instead of every 4 beats, that would help me differentiate it, right? So there's the accent, which happens dynamically, and then there's harmonic change is the other thing to listen for in terms of determining whether you're dealing with 4/4 or 8/4. Again, 8/4 super, 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 super uncommon. Now, 3/4 versus 6/8, those are both common, right? So 3/4, dun da 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 dun dun dun. 6/8 has only 2 beats, but it has compound. It's a compound meter. So 6/8. So 3/4 would be 1, 2, 3. 6/8 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So loudest, soft, soft. Loudest, second loudest, soft, 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 soft. So 6/8 really is 2 beats, beat 1, beat 2, but they're written as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the 6 is actually referring to the subdivision, which is in 3 parts of the beat. And the actual beat is 1, 2, 1, 2. So if we are going So let's say we're going. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which would be very different than and I don't know a ton of stuff on 6/8 because that's not very common for jazz or anything like that. But let's say we're going. So let's say we're that's a terrible improvisation, but I'm trying to get. So I'm trying to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. 6/8 usually is a little bit faster than that too. So there are certain tempos. So 6/8, zam ba da 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 dum da da dee dee da 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 dum da dum da dee da 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 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. So to answer the question, you have to find where the beat is. You have to decide how the accent is happening. You listen to dynamics and harmonic change to see where beat 1 is, and then you see how many beats there are. And then you look for the subdivision of the beat. Is it 1 and 1, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, or is it 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a? So the real questions would be 4/4 versus 12/8, 3/4 versus 6/8. And 4/4 has 4 beats, so does 12/8. But it has 2 different subdivisions of the beat. This one's a little bit different. This is not the same analogous. This would be 3/4 versus 9/8. But 3/4 versus 6/8, this has 3 beats, this has 2 beats. So there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of focus in on that. So I hope that gets you started in terms of answering your questions. Good question. Here's a question. Dr. B, I am wondering how much time a growing composer should spend doing deep analysis of other composers' works. Is that something all composers do, pen and paper theoretical analysis to understand? Well, there's always going to be exceptions, but I would say the overwhelming majority of composers do pen and paper analysis of other composers. If we look back historically, Johann Sebastian Bach studied pen and paper the music of Antonin Vivaldi. So Mozart studied pen and paper the music of Bach. We know historically that composers have looked at the scores, the music, and have analyzed it. They analyze it sometimes by writing out the music. They analyze it by performing it and playing it on the piano so they can hear it and feel it and see. So they'll perform it. Sometimes they'll make arrangements of it. So they'll take a piece that's for an orchestra and they'll do a piano version of it. Franz Liszt did that. Franz Liszt would take operatic scores from Richard Wagner and turn them into piano pieces. So that idea is something that has happened a lot. And jazz musicians will transcribe the solos of other musicians. So as a saxophone player, I transcribed, and I'll pull some of these off of my wall. I got album covers that I have up, and these are albums I've had since I was in high school, right? I'll take some John Coltrane, I'll write up his solo. I'll take Sonny Rollins, I'll write out his solo. And I'll write it out note for note. I'll analyze it from a theoretical perspective, like, okay, he's playing the 7th and he's doing a tritone sub, and here's how he resolves it. And then I play along with the recording. And that's how, and if you think about improvisation is essentially composition that can be varied and that happens on the spot. So it's kind of the same thing. So in rock composers, guitarists will figure out note by note the solos of their heroes, and they'll analyze it. They'll be like, oh, I see what he's doing, and you're analyzing it from a theoretical perspective. Sometimes not super in depth, but you're at least at some level you're looking at it from a theoretical. You're looking at it from a technical perspective and from a stylistic perspective. So I think, how much should you spend? I'm always want to put hours. I think you know, at a certain stage, when you're kind of like at a certain developed stage, you're going to spend an hour to two every day analyzing other people's music. That would be pretty common standard. 1 to 2 hours analyzing another, you know, and you might do that for a couple months to a couple years, depending on what it is you're trying to understand. And you'll just analyze it. And so the things you learn by either transcribing solos or studying scores, because I'll pull off my shelves as well. You know, I wanted to, you know, when I first heard Igor Stravinsky, you know, and Rite of Spring, like I got the score and I started studying it. I started looking at it and trying to say, okay, what are these harmonies? How does the voice leading work? What's going on? Because I wanted to learn how those sounds happened. Because I was like, oh, that's interesting. What is it? How am I going to do anything that's remotely similar to that, or takes any inspiration from it? So those are some of the ways I would recommend you study. All right. All right, looking here at the chat, how do you identify the possible place to use a secondary dominant during harmonization? That's a good question. All right, so let's move on to our next question here. And let me clear off a little space. Secondary functions. So for the person who asked about telling different meters apart, I think lesson 2 in my videos talks into that. So some of these things I've talked about before. I'm always happy to talk about them again. So don't worry about asking a question that I've already answered. You can always answer the question in a different way to give different insight, and I'm happy to do that. But if you're looking for more, like let's say I gave you an answer today that you're like, oh, I kind of get it, but you think you need a little bit more, I may have had that answered that more in a different way in some of my earlier videos. So just like secondary dominance, I definitely have a couple videos on this, but I'm happy to talk about it again. So the idea is identifying a possible place. So where is a place for secondary dominant? So either we're talking about in terms of you're composing a piece, in which case you can put it, you have a lot of latitude on where you put it, or you're, let's say, harmonizing a melody, which means the melody is given, you can't just change it, and you've got to figure out where things can go. So what I would like to start with is just our harmonic progression chart. And we know that, and I'm putting in all the arrows, 3 can jump to 4, 5 can jump back to 6, 5 goes to 7 diminished, 4 goes to 2, 4 can jump to 1, 1 can go anywhere. So a secondary dominant can really, if you're composing, it can be inserted anywhere in the chart. So if you were to just say, I'm going to take, 1 can go anywhere. So let's say I go 1, 6. Once I get to 6, I pretty much have to go to 4 or 2. So let's say I go to 4, and then 4 can either go to, so you can move vertically to anything, right? So 6 can go to 4 or 2, right? That it goes into the block. Predominant function, dominant function. So I'm going to say I'm going to go to 4. 4 then can go to 5, 7 diminished 6. It's going to always be in first inversion. Or 2. I'm going to go to 2. And then I'm going to go to 7 diminished 6. And then I'm going to go to 1. So let's say that's my progression. So let me tell you, if we're composing, you can put a secondary function pretty much before any major or minor triad. So you could put a 5 of 6 right here. You could put a 5, 7 of 4, and I'll tell you why it can't be a 5 of 4. Right there, you can put a 5 of 2 here. This is a diminished triad, so you can't do that. And 5 of 1 is just 5, so that doesn't make any sense. So that doesn't really exist. So if we're at 1, and we're going to go to 6, we can go 1, 5, and that was a 5, 7. Let me do a plain. You can choose between 5 or 5, 7. Usually you have a choice. Sometimes it has to be 5, 7. In this case, and I'll get there in a second. But let's say we're here at 1, and we're going to go to 6. But I want to go, instead I want to spice it up, and I want to go. That's how I would do it. Or 5, 7. And then I get to 6. And then I'm going to go to 1. I'm going to go from 6 to 4. But let's say I want to insert a 5 of 4. A 5 of 4 would just be C, E, G. Now, if I'm in the key of C, that is, right? So C, E, G is a 5 of 4, but it's also a one chord. You're going to hear it as a 1 chord. You're not going to hear it as 5 of 4. So you have to make it a secondary dominant, it has to have a note that's not in the key. That's the rule. It has to have a note that's not in the key. So I can go from 1, 5 of 6, to 6, to 5, 7 of 4, to 4. And then I can go to 5 of 2, 7 diminished 6 right there. So let's just pick. We're gonna pick. You know, where can they go? I'm just gonna take that one out. So I'm just gonna have those two, right? So I'm gonna go. Here's the first without the secondary dominants. Now here's with. I'm sorry. Let's see if I can do that again. I'll do those two versions. You can kind of hear what why they work. You insert them into what would be a good harmonic progression. So let's say here's just the basic, the ones I've written in black. Now with the secondary functions. So that's, with a composition, you just find a good place in the harmonic progression where they can be inserted. If you're harmonizing a melody and you're saying, where can I use a secondary function? This is a little bit more complicated because if you're harmonizing the melody, your melody note is either going to be a diatonic note or a chromatic note, right? If it's chromatic, your life is very easy, right? Because then you just say, that chromatic note is going to be one of the chromatic notes in one of my secondary functions. It's a little easier to focus in and see it. What's really tricky is when it's a diatonic melody that you're trying to harmonize. So let's say we're in C major and we're just going to go up the scale. Let's say our melody does this. Where can we harmonize? Right? If we're going up a scale, by the way, it can never be the 7th of the chord because 7ths have to resolve down. So if we go from a C, let's say our melody, and we're going to D. You kind of have to do these permutations, and I'm going to actually try to do E to E, F, G, right? So look at the possibilities. It could be this could be a 3 chord, it could be a 1 chord, it could be a 6 chord. I'm just for triads, right? This E is either the root, the 3rd, or the 5th. This F is either the root, the 3rd, or the 5th. This G is either the root, the 3rd, or the 5th. Now, if this was a 5, could I have a 5 of 5, which mean a D major triad, with the F? No. So I can't do that. We're now going to find, if this is 5, we can't put a secondary function here. If this is 3, that means it's I'm sorry, if this is a 3 chord, that means we need a B major triad. F's not in that. And if this is a 1 chord, then we don't get a secondary. So there's no way that this F can be harmonized with a secondary dominant. Just not possible. I just went through all the permutations. Let's do here. So if this is a 4 chord, a 5 of 4 would be a C7. Is there an E in that? The answer is yes. So I could, instead of calling this a 3, I could call this, I mean, it doesn't matter, 3. Instead of calling it one of these options, 3, 1, or 6, I could do 5, 7 of 4. And I can harmonize that E with a 5, 7 of 4. So I could go, and say my melody goes, so I'm going 1, passing tone, 5, 7 of 4, 4. So what I do is I look for, my process for where to find it would be, in this case I said, what are all the possible triads? And then is this note included in the 5 of 5, the 5 of 3, or the 5 of 1, which doesn't exist, right? The answer was no. So I had to go back and I said, okay, 4. Well, is there an E in a 5 of 4? Yes, there is. How about a 5 of 2? 5 of 2 would be an A7. So the answer is yes. I could put I could make this a 5 of this. There's an E in a 5 of 2 because it would be an A major triad. Diminished, we don't have 5 of. So there's another option, right? I could go. Right? So I just made up 2 progressions, right? I went 1 to either 5, 7 of 4 to 4, or 5, let's do it 5, 7 of 2 to 2. And the melody is C, D, that's a passing tone, E to F, passing tone, right? So I'm just looking for harmonizations, and this is when you're harmonizing a melody. This is the hardest thing to do, by the way, harmonizing melodies. It's so easy to get bogged down and not know what's possible. So that was 1, 5, 7 of 4, 4. And here we go. And we're going to have an unusual doubling there if we do a 5, 7, because the 7th will have to go down. But that works as well. So that's the kind of like step by step. I always say, look at a note. It's either the root, the 3rd, the 5th, or you could also go into 7th chords or the 7th of a chord, and you can look at all the permutations, and then you can say, well, what would 5 of that chord be? And is that note, does that support that harmony, melody note rather? All right. All right, Finale Pro software is free for download. Export MIDI file to hear what you wrote. Oh yeah, good. It's Corelli second movement from Church Sonata Opus 3 number 9. Okay, so we got for the Corelli example we did, second movement of his church sonata, Opus 3, number 9. We can you can go and listen and compare and see how close I got to what Corelli actually wrote. And there may be more than one right answer. I always thought, wouldn't it be fun to like take one of the great composers, Corelli, Beethoven, Mozart, take something of theirs and see if you could like do another version that was like at least equally as good. And could you imagine if you could come up with something even better? Like talk about like, to go back to the other question about studying and analyzing other composers, wouldn't that be the goal to set for yourself? Be like, okay, I'm going to take Mozart's whatever sonata, and I'm going to see if I can take it and just make it better. Woo! That would be fun. That would be a good challenge. And hello from London. Some other. All right. When is the next live broadcast? I'm trying to do the live Q&As every 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from now, on Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, is when I'm planning to do the next one. Prepared piano. Yes, John Cage, prepared piano is, when we're talking about artificial harmonics. So prepared piano, John Cage is probably the most well-known. Negative harmony, Danny, is on my list of things to talk about. I'm going to make a list, and I'm going to write this one down at the top of it, just like I had a list from last time. I'm going to put negative harmony on the top for next. I've done a little, but I want to still do a little bit more before I talk about it. So thank you for reminding me. AI music theory algorithms. Yeah, right? We'll see. Wouldn't it be interesting? See what we can come up with. Music theory all came from really advanced math thinking. Well, not all, but in a large part came from, right? Because math thinking, so if you think about historically, ancient Greece, people like Pythagoras, who's known for our triangles and a squared plus b squared equals c squared, also did a ton in music. And mathematicians love the mathematical side of music. No question about it. There's a mathematical side of music. There's the acoustics. All of that stuff has a huge math component. I wouldn't go so far to say is all, because understanding the mathematical side is critical and essential, but you also have to understand human psychology and emotions. So math is very, very important, but you also need to have some semblance of understanding of human emotions. The math isn't going to tell you how to make a Schubert art song and combine it with lyrics. And it might not even write for you a Beethoven symphony. You're going to have some sense of drama and theater and emotion and dramatic intent. So I would absolutely agree with you that drawing the importance of math cannot be underestimated, especially when we look at people like Pythagoras and how it was, it's like, in terms of studying, it used to be like music, astronomy. They were all put like in the same like group of things to study. Even through part of the Middle Ages, people like Boethius talked about music and astronomy and math and combined them in certain ways that we think are unusual now. All right, looks like we have another question here. Why am I having trouble to voice a 6 to 7 diminished 6 progression? I'm trying to make an interesting progression, but when I get to this, 4, no matter what voice I try, I can't make it smooth voice. Okay, that's a good question. We're going to talk 4. Let me just double check and make sure I got it right. 4 to 7 diminished 6. All right, let's roll up our sleeves and see if we can find out a good voice leading for 4 to 7 diminished 6. Diminished triads are always especially problematic because that tritone, that devil's interval, its level of dissonance requires special preparation and resolution that other triads do not require. So it puts limitations and therefore makes our life a little harder in that sense. All right. We're going to be C major. We're going to go, actually, you wrote, let's make it C minor, because you wrote 4 to 7 diminished. Oh, yeah. So here there's usually, in minor, you often get these what normally would not be allowed in terms of augmented or diminished intervals sometimes become allowed in minor keys simply because of, you just have only so many options, right? So let's say we're going to go F is our bass, and then D is our bass. Okay, so 7 diminished 6, the B diminished triad with D in the bass, F minor. Okay, so let's throw up a simple voicing for our 4 chord, and then here's where we're going to put our. Let me see if this will work. Can it be that easy? I don't know. I'm sure I made a mistake at this point. Let me take a look here. Yeah, of course I made a mistake, right? I did parallel octaves. It felt wrong as I was writing it, right? So F, F, D, D. Definitely no dice. That's not a way. That's not going to be allowed at all. And then so here's the trick. Is we're going to need to. You're supposed to have 2 Ds, an F, and a B. And if you have 2 Fs here, F has to go to the D. This other F can't go to the D. So the question is, does it can either stay. That's actually the only option, right? The only option it can have is to stay, because it can't go to D, and it can't jump to B because that would be a leap of a tritone. So has to do that, which then means that this A flat, either you can't double the leading tone, so it can't go to B. It can't go to the D. So yeah, this is one of those spots. It's not going to work, and this is why. So you're absolutely right. It can't be done without breaking a rule. Not possible. So you'll notice that composers often don't write 4 in root position to 7 diminished 6 in a minor key because it has voice leading problems. So that said, what do you do? Like, what rules would you break if you had to break one? Okay, so parallel octaves is not the rule you would break. A leap of a augmented or diminished interval is probably the rule you're going to break, or an unusual doubling. So what you might do is you might do that. So you might go from to. So you might double the F instead of doubling the D. You resolve like this. Right? So doubling is usually the first rule that gets broken. And so what you say is, listen, I'm doing it for voice leading purposes. And it's the power of the voice leading that makes it work. And where this resolves kind of matters, right? Right? And you say, my alto goes da, da, da. And my soprano goes da, da, da. And my tenor goes da, da, da. And my bass goes da, da, da. Good voice leading. All right, so the doubling and the diminished triad's not ideal. It emphasizes the tritone a little bit, but voice leading is more important, and that's true. So that's probably the rule. After that, you might get an augmented or diminished leap. Right, so what if you were to instead do this? Would that be, let me just listen to it. Oh, that's so dissonant. You know, I don't think you would find this in an outer voice. you might, would you maybe find it in an inner voice, right? So would you disguise it? So instead of having it voiced like that, could you say, maybe put F, A flat here, then F, C, then have this jump up to the D here. This goes down to the D. This stays on the F. This goes to the B natural. And then you can go to C. So this is going to be a little weird because these two D's. Oh no, I can't do this. Oh, this is doubly bad. There's even more reasons why that sounded bad to me. The D, D, C, C, right? That can't happen. The one D is going to have to go up to the E flat, so this would have to go up to here. Maybe you'd go like so. Let's see if that's possible. That seems to work a lot better, right? So doubling, you might have an unusual doubling for the 7 diminished 6. You might, or you could look into having an unusual doubling in the F minor triad, right? It doesn't have to be in the diminished triad. Or you have an augmented or diminished leap, but if you do, you should hide it in an inner voice. So it's not quite so jarring. So good question, right? There's certain things where it's just not possible. And if you're taking a music theory exam, you have to recognize that there's certain positions where you can't get a right answer without breaking one of the rules. And then what you want to do is you want to say, okay, which rule should I break the first? Doubling, number 1. Augmented diminished leap, number 2. If you're going to do that augmented diminished leap breaking of a rule, put it in an inner voice. So hopefully that helps. All right, great question. Great question. Use diminished chords in your writing. Diminished chords are awesome, especially fully diminished chords, right? Right? Diminished chords are great. Beethoven. So you could get but even just a regular diminished 7 diminished 6. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why you should use 7 diminished 6 in your writing. 5-1. It's definitive. Every single time. If you won't want it, but not everything should be as emphasized, right? Imagine if I said every word exactly the same emphasis. Boring. Crazy. Doesn't make sense, right? So you want to basically have music that can have different levels of emphasis, to have an ebb and flow. And if you're always using 5-1, it could be boring and has the same emphasis, right? You're running that risk. So 5-6-1, 7 diminished 6-1. This gives you variety and it gives you a different level of emphasis. So if you're going to have a cadence, right? That's why we study perfect, authentic cadence and imperfect, authentic cadence, right? Not every cadence should be a perfect, authentic cadence. Some of them should be an imperfect, authentic cadence because not every section has the same level of finality to it. Not every conclusion feels as strong as, let's say, a perfect, authentic cadence. And the reason for that is, especially if you're going to try to compose music that's longer than like 3 minutes long, right? If you're just going to write a real short song, sure, you don't need a lot of variety because it's not that long. But if you're going to write something longer, you need the variety. And a 7 diminished 6, it's great. It gives it this kind of like, it's like, oh, we resolved, but you know, that there might be more coming, right? And in a minor key, oh please, a 2 diminished 6 is just glorious. If we're cruising along. right there. There's my tuned diminished sixth. Right, so 1, 2 diminished sixths. See how that's such a colorful sound to 5, or let's say 7 diminished sixths. I'm going to go up and resolve it correctly. It's kind of like using diminished triads will help you get some subtleties. It'll help you get some variety. It'll some different, it's worth experimenting with. All right. All right. Good. Hey Wayne, thanks for the love from India. I appreciate that. And yeah, I always try to make things as understandable as possible. These aren't simple ideas, which is one of the reasons why I painstakingly, when I did the lessons, I did them in a specific order. Just when I talk about the history of music where there's like an evolution, and if you try to skip a step, you can get confused really easily. That's why I put my lessons in the order I do. All these Q&As, these are all like, there's no order here. So if you're just listening at the Q&As, yeah, you could get confused. But I work real hard trying to make things be as simple and understandable. And I remember when I first started teaching augmented sixth chords, I was just doing it based on the method put in the book. I said to myself, wait a minute. This principle doesn't hold up in all circumstances. And then you have to make up all these exceptions. Is there a rule that works without exceptions? And I always try to find when that's true. The simplest, most, widespread principle that holds true as many circumstances as possible. So I appreciate that I was able to make it clear enough for you to understand. It makes me very happy. All right. Alrighty. So I'm going to, let's see, how many more questions? We got a few more questions here. Okay, so slow it down, folks. I'm going to see if I can finish these questions here. Let me just I'm just reading through this Stephen Koska's tonal harmony book. Many passwords are also shown there, but it is much better. Yeah, I use Stephen Koska's tonal harmony book. And you're right, it's certainly got a lot of great information, but sometimes just putting it, like not everyone learns the same way, right? Like sometimes reading a book is great and it works for many people and it's a skill you should develop for sure. But sometimes hearing someone explain it from like an auditory learner perspective can be really helpful. And just kind of like what I think is particularly useful is the step-by-step process that you see as it happens. And that's not something you can get in a book, right? Like in a book, you can skip ahead, you can see what the finished answer is. And I guess if you wanted to write a book this way, you could, but it would be challenging, right? Where it's like, here's step 1, step 2, and then you see it by each as it unfolds in a period of time. Like a book, everything's on the printed page at once. It's done. It's like when you look at art, like visual art, like a painting. The entire painting, it's done. Boom. There it is. And it might take you time to absorb all the information that is there in front of you, but the actual artwork has been, the creation of that artwork has been completed. This is very different than the way we experience music. You don't go like, Beethoven Symphony, boom, now let me absorb it. No. You have to wait for music to unfold over a period of time. There is a sequence of one melody to a next melody to the next melody. It's very different than experiencing visual art. This is one of the big differences. There's a lot of similarities. The aspect of time and the fact that you have to wait till the end of the symphony to say, I've heard Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Whereas you can say, I've seen the Mona Lisa. And you could say that after 1 second. That is not to undermine or say one is better than the other or anything. It's just they're different ways of experiencing it. And I think when it comes to learning, reading a textbook about music theory is a little bit like trying to understand music as if you're looking at a piece of visual art where it's boom, it's all there at once. Whereas hearing someone talk about it and go through the step-by-step process is very much more of a musical approach to that understanding. I'm not sure my analogy holds up 100%, but just off the cuff, that's what it made me think of. All right, is there a such thing as secondary predominance? Yes, yes there is. Secondary predominance do exist. So let me just, I'll just show you. It's a great question, and when you're seeing like lots of circle of fifths progressions and you're not quite modulated, you can absolutely be like, I'm in the key of C, we go 1, 4, and let's say we're gonna two of no, it wouldn't. That wouldn't be for that one. I'd have to. I'm gonna have to think about this for a second. It can happen, right? So it could be like a 2 of and 5 of, and you write it like that. So you write 2, 5 of whatever it is you're going to. But let me see. It couldn't be 5 because that means this 2 would just be a regular D minor. So let me see. Let's do a 5 going to 5. Let me. This is, I don't think it's possible, right? Because this would be a G major triad. This would be a D major triad. This would be an A minor triad, which is just really the same thing as a 6 chord. So who cares, right? That's not different enough. It's not outside of the key, and it doesn't really make a ton of sense. But what if we said, let's say we're going to 3, okay? Which would mean the key of C. We've got E minor, B major. There we go. That's what we would do. Let's say that was our progression. You're writing out the triads, right? You got C, F sharp minor triad, B major triad, E minor, and then it just like, then it goes to the F major triad, G major triad, C major triad, right? So our progression ends up being something, this is gonna be a little wacky. I'm not quite sure how I do the voice leading from the C to the F sharp. I think we'd probably put something in between because that's pretty distant. I mean that's pretty. It's a tritone leap. It's maybe I would put it like this. Make it 2/6, right? So that I can have some kind of better voice leading, right? So maybe I go. But woo, that's so chromatic. And I would do a 5/7. I'm just trying to think of voice leading purposes now, right? So yeah, so that's a pretty unusual progression. I'm not saying that's common, but that's what it would be. That's what you can do. And you wouldn't say you modulated to E minor because it went by so quickly. But that's how you analyze it. Secondary predominant. Usually it's a 2-5-1 or some version of that. So good question. Good question. All right. Two questions. This is from Ben. What is the best way to go about understanding chords and harmony? I haven't found a book that was helpful to me. All right, Ben, I'll give you 2 books and to take a look at. Actually, more than 2 books. I'm going to give you a bunch of books to take a look at. All right. So there is Tonal Harmony, which is a traditional college textbook published by McGraw-Hill, Koska, and Payne. There's old editions you can get for very cheap. That's got all sorts of good examples. They have self-tests with answers at the back. You can also get HarperCollins college outlines like music theory, right? No fancy anything, but the basic information, which is excellent. And then there's these harmonic materials and tonal music, a program course, Paul O. Harder. I think this is a very old edition. What's interesting about this is they give you questions on this side and answers on the next side, or actually no, the questions here and the answers here, so the other way around. But you can kind of like you can kind of go through. Each page has questions right next to the answer, so you cover up one side while you read the question and try to figure it out. So I'll put those in the description. But again, harmonic materials and tonal music, Paul O. Harder. HarperCollins College Outline, Music Theory. Tonal Harmony by McGraw-Hill, Koska, and Payne. Those are some, start there and you'll be in very good shape. All right. Another question. I was studying the solo bassoon intro to Rite of Spring yesterday. The rhythm is incomprehensible. How does anyone make sense of it? Well, Stravinsky is not easy, right? We're talking many, many years of things getting more and more complicated. So it's a measure of 4/4 followed by a measure of 3/4, measure of 4/4, measure of 2/4, measure of 3/4, another measure of 3/4. That's your that's the first 4 measures are first 5 measures. So the first off, it's marked solo ad lib. So that means ad lib means like to make the tempo a little bit less obvious beat wise. You got fermatas in a lot of places. You've got let's put it up. Let's put a little bit up there. So keep in mind when you say incomprehensible, that you're really referring incomprehensible to you. Obviously, there's a number of bassoon players in the world who have been able to comprehend it, as well as Stravinsky. So let's use the word really hard or very complicated. So the rhythm is quarter note fermata, 4/4. Then we have 2 grace notes. Boy, grace notes can really make your rhythms a little bit more complicated. 4 16th notes, a triplet with some grace notes in there, and a fermata, and a triplet, and a bar line, and then it goes to 3/4 meter, 2 8th notes, then it's all 8th notes, but we have some grace notes in there. So let me write those in. 2 grace notes here, and 1 grace note here. All right. So let's take a look, just at least at the first 2 measures. So we got beat 1, 2 E and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? So that's how I would mark out the beats. So it's always important where are your downbeats, downbeat, 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 downbeat. And listen, rhythms could be more complicated than this, right? Because at least here we get a downbeats on everything, right? There's nothing that's tied over. So if we were to just take out the grace notes and take out the fermatas, you get da 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 dee da 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 dee da dee da dee da. Right? And I kind of sang the beginning of that melody for you. And let me do it again. Da dee da da dee da dee da da dee da 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 dee da da da. And I forget, without the grace notes, I don't quite remember how the melody goes. And then you start adding in the grace notes, right? da, ba ba da 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 dee da da, ba ba da da dee. Did I do that? Bum 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 ba ba bum bum bum. And so it's like it cheats rhythm off of this, right? So da 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 da. So this stays where it's this last part stays. So what da 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 becomes da 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 da. You sneak in a bum bum ba ba dum bum bum ba yum be dum, and you kind of like just map it out like that. So figuring out how to map out rhythms and you know, nice and slow. Dot 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 1 2 E and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and 2 and 3 and just taking off 1 ba ba dum 1 da 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 dee dum. You know, so just go beat by beat. 3 and a 4, 3 and da da 3 and da da 4. Da 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 da. Just beat by beat, you can kind of figure it out. And rhythms that you thought were incomprehensible or just beyond your understanding, you can break those down, just like we're breaking down harmony and things like that. You can break down rhythm into these kind of like step-by-step pieces that you build upon until you're like, oh yeah, I can totally play the opening of the bassoon solo rhythm for Rite of Spring. Not easy, right? So you should listen to it. It's a super evocative, very